How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Welcome back to my conversation with Yael Averbuch, former professional athlete, owner of the training app TechniFootball, and the general manager for Gotham FC. Last time, Yael talked a lot about bad team cultures, good team cultures, and the various directions, top-down or otherwise, in which culture building really occurs, especially in sports teams. In this new episode, we're going to get into the evolution of Yael's view of team dynamics, as well as some of the challenges of being a relatively young team like Gotham FC. So I'm curious, switching gears just a little bit, I want to talk about your experience of the impact of having really good culture. That in the corporate world, we talk about the fact that, at least it's my view and experience, that you could take the same employees, and if you put them in 3 different cultures, those employees will actually perform differently, regardless of whether their talent or experience or skill is, that the culture has that much influence over how they do their daily work. Do you think that's true in the athletic world as well? Like if you took the same players, the same soccer players, and put them on 3 different teams that had 3 different cultures, would those players perform differently?
Absolutely. I think soccer, maybe even compared to other sports, is very much like a growing business in the sense of it's so interconnected, and how somebody like the nuances of performance and how people connect is so important. One individual can't just get it done for the team. Like it has to be really fluid, it has to be interconnected, and everyone has to be on the same page. Maybe more so than other sports where you can start and stop a lot, or one player can just have a great game and, score a bunch of points. It's really not like that in soccer. So everybody's individual contribution and the way it works together is hugely important to the team's success. And that's the same way it is in a business. It's not as like you can have one great executive. That doesn't make the business successful. Yeah. And so I think that what a great culture does is it allows each individual to really understand the kind of the boundaries, the guardrails, and how they can succeed. And the best cultures, in my opinion, everyone is clear on that, and they're clear on a really ambitious target. And that's what it was at UNC. It's like you knew how to succeed, but also you were never going to feel comfortable. You always had somewhere else you were going to go. And everyone shared that understanding of what everyone else needed to do to succeed as well. And in that, there's a lot of power, because the best cultures, I think, bring out the best in each individual, but then it's for the collective of the team. And I've said this a lot of times. I really think that there's no soccer player in the women's game who is good enough to outplay a coach who doesn't believe in them or a culture that doesn't support them. And so, yes, you need a certain amount of talent to be able to be an MVP or be able to be, a certain level of performance. But a bad culture or a coach that doesn't believe in you, doesn't set you up for success, can damper that with any player. No player can outplay that. And maybe that's a little unique to soccer because of what I just described, but really, the culture can either propel a team or totally drag it down. And I've been part of really talented teams, and it's like feels impossible. It doesn't click. It's so frustrating. It's going wrong. And I've been part of teams that are like a little bit more average, but it just works. And it's some of it is really intentional with the culture, and some is just the right group and mix of people with the right type of leadership in that moment. And something I didn't really think about, but what was said also in this NWSL meetings that was really interesting, I think, is the team is different every year. Like regardless of the changes you make on the roster and how many there are, the changes you make to staff, even if the exact same people show up, you have a different team year over year because no person is the same year over year. And I think that is a really interesting way to look at it. And it's a really unique puzzle. So the same culture that worked at one moment in time could need to evolve itself to fit the same group of people, but then it's a different team. So it's so complex, and it's really hard. I think it's really hard to see exactly how it plays out. Sometimes, like I've been part of things that either work or don't work, and it seems kind of ambiguous, but certainly I have felt personally the power of it being right or not being right. And it is like, it's a difference with feeling like, why did I train so much? It just isn't working versus like you're on top of the world and playing at the best you've ever played. And it could be the difference of like a couple people here and there, a couple statements here and there, a tactical switch, like really small details that can make or break it.
Wow. So I'm curious about, as you know, you've had a lot of different roles in the soccer world, from being, you know, a beginning player to being a captain and a senior leader of a team to, and seeing lots of teams, and now being a general manager is a whole nother point of view or perspective to look at a team. And so just first question about that is, so how is your view of team dynamics different looking at it from a GM's perspective than when you were a player?
Yeah, I'm learning so much, and if my view is evolving really rapidly, like every few months that goes by, I'm kind of like, oh, I wish I knew then what I see now, and I'm sure I look, 3 months from now, I'll have the same thought. It's such a different perspective because I am the leader of a staff culture and a player team culture. And I never thought before about staff culture. That just wasn't part of my paradigm because I was playing on a team and there was a head coach, but it wasn't, there wasn't such a big staff. And so I now see so many layers to it. I see, the mix of players we have, the mix of staff we have in terms of the people they are. I think of the club and where we are at this moment in time. And, we are not a new club, but we're embarking on a new strategy and just how dynamic women's soccer is. So like the playing field is literally changing as we're growing this. And it's professionalizing in ways that weren't part of my vision when we first started. And so it's so multidimensional that I think this is the biggest challenge to my leadership that I have felt by far in terms of working on a culture that when I came into this job, there was not a culture of winning here. And to create a winning culture and also make it enjoyable and sustainable, those three things together is a really, really tough thing to do. And I took it for granted when I was a player and I showed up in good cultures. I was like, oh, this is great. That's great. We have our core values. We said it. It's so much harder than just listing those things and having, the one leader. So I think that's the key is like, yeah, we could win, but do people enjoy it? And can we keep winning? Or we could make this really sustainable thing, but are we going to win, which everyone wants to do? And then, we could have a lot of fun, but be like bad at all the rest of the stuff. And so the trifecta of those is really important. And I think joy and humor and that feeling value is so important to making something sustainable. So for us, the way I see it at Gotham is we had a little bit of success, but we want to be sustainably successful. And I am really challenged as a leader to figure out how to do that. And it's different than any time I was a captain of a team, anything else I've been part of. This is really different, and the stakes are much higher, and there's a lot of attention on us in ways that this is new to me. So I've seen it done well. I've seen it done not well, but putting that all together and making it unique to us is really, really challenging.
I was going to ask about, so as you as you take on that challenge, are there models that you can look at of where you think it's been done really well at a professional level? Because college is a different environment, good or bad, just it's different. On a professional level, it's a whole nother thing. Where's the model of where it's done well?
Yeah, I think it's not so much a model. I have taken pieces of different places I've been that I would like to implement here, and they stick out in my mind as like I think, the difference between what matters and what doesn't matter is really important to me. Like, I don't care what people wear to work. Like that to me is not important. Maybe the culture will evolve here and that does become important and we find value in that. But right now, that to me doesn't matter. But like, and this is something I always think of you with, but like responsiveness does really matter to me. And that's something that I just think throughout, it's a way you show people respect. And I don't, like winning is really important to me. I think that not every professional sports team, surprisingly to me now I've learned, really, really cares about winning. We really care about winning here. And I think that is important and that should be the driving factor in a lot of decisions. So there's things that I'd say like these pillars of or belief systems that I've taken from other places I've been that really matter to me. I think another important thing that people kind of say, but sometimes don't do is that there are things that are more important than soccer. Like we're human beings. And I think the human component of really at the end of the day, things matter. Like missing a family member's wedding or missing a loved one's funeral. Like those things are not no game and no practice session and nothing we're doing here as a soccer club is more important than those things. And that's something that Anson really taught me, is there was always something greater and a human element to it. And so there's certain things that just are like, I don't have the full model because this is just a different project than I've ever been part of. But I have these things that come out in the way I lead and the way I want us to do things. And still, even, my leadership team here at Gotham has taught me a lot of things about culture, about this. So I'm adding to it all the time. And I have kind of this mini arsenal of these core beliefs that I have that are evolving and that I'm adding to. But I'd say like the difficult thing is that there's not a model. I wish there was, because that would be much easier to do.
Well, I would suspect, just from what you're describing in my own experience, and I think about what I would suspect Anson would say on this topic, is that probably for him, it took a number of years of having things like you're describing, where you have some feelings, some thoughts, some belief systems of, these are things I think are really important. But I don't know really how to blend all of that together into a coherent picture that says, these are the 10 things. There's pieces of this, pieces of that. And I would imagine Anson would probably say that over his first 5 or 10 years, I'm not sure it always evolved, but especially, I'm guessing in his first 5 or 10 years, they evolved a lot, and then reached a place where they coalesced into some clear vision that always had tiny tweaks, but became, this is how I look at the world. And I suspect, if I think of my own leadership career, I think it probably happened that way, that when I created our first set of fundamentals, some of them were things I just thought about for years and had always taught and talked about, but had never codified in any particular way. And over time, it evolved into a clearer picture in my mind of, this is the kind of company I want to run. And it may not be the right for everybody, but this is my vision of how I think we do things really well. But I think it takes some time for that to evolve. And it sounds to me like you're working your way through picking up the pieces of what those are.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very true to where I am on my journey. And I do think it takes time. And I think that's part of why, we need to do some things to clarify at Gotham and to start to lay the groundwork. But I don't believe in coming in with where we are as a club and where I am as a leader and saying, boom, this is the fully fleshed thing. Here's how we do it. Like, realistically, the teams that we have and the staff that we have here from a couple of years ago through the next however many years is going to be really integral to creating that. And probably never again will the groups that are here be so influential in what becomes the club culture. So it is a unique time, and it is really a building stage. But yeah, I'm slowly pulling things and piecing together. And I love that part. I think that's one of the most exciting parts about being a leader is none of them are like values that I've made up. They're not proprietary concepts, but to be able to choose the ones that are important to you, that have given meaning to your own life and journey, and to kind of galvanize a group of people surrounding those. I love that process. Yeah. I'm definitely still learning. I can't say I've done a great job of it here so far, but it really, I'm about to do like a staff kickoff presentation on Wednesday. And then, we'll have our players arrive, and you get this one moment in time for the year to say, here's who we are. Here's where we're coming from. Here's where we're going. Here's what matters. And it's a moment to really riff. I've thought a lot about creating these presentations and what is the most important thing for me to say, because everyone's nervous and there are a million things going on. So what are they going to take? If they take like 2 things from this, what could they be? So it's really a fun project, but a work in progress that I do expect will take some years, to your point.
So as you think about recruiting players, and in the corporate world, obviously that's hiring, but you're hiring too, both staff and players. How do you, there's a lot of things you got to balance. Obviously, you're trying to bring in certain players are going to play in a certain way and fit in the scheme you have from a purely athletic standpoint. But how do you try to figure out who would be a good fit in the culture that you want to have at Gotham?
I'm learning a lot about the questions to ask and the things for me that are red flags or green flags. I don't know if that's actually a term to be used. And so one thing that I think is really important is to say very honestly who we are and who we're not, and hear people react to that. And also, one of the first things we do is I do a little intro whenever I have a recruiting conversation. And then the first thing we do, it's usually me and the coach, maybe a member of ownership. And after we introduce ourselves, we ask the player to tell us about themselves and to tell us what their priorities are and what's most important to them. And I've started to realize there are certain things that they say that either will make them a good fit or not. And for example, if a player is focused on I mean, usually they wouldn't say this to us because we're in New Jersey, but if they want an easy life and to live in a nice weather climate and they want it to be glamorous and flashy and their playing time, and if they're the center of attention is the most important thing to them. And there are ways they say that that's not like that, but you can just tell, then we're not for them. And neither, probably New York isn't for anybody who wants that kind of lifestyle in their field, probably. But if somebody is really focused on getting better, even the top players in the world, and they want a coach who's going to, on our, our coach gives pretty blunt feedback on our recruiting meetings to the point where sometimes I'm kind of like, okay, that's like a little harsh. It's one of the best players in the world. Like, do I have to say this? But actually seeing how they react to it, the players who will do well at Gotham love that. They are so excited. I get a message from the agent after the fact saying that was the most she learned in however long. She's so excited to play for Juan, our coach. And the players who kind of don't love that or are offended or maybe didn't want that, they're not right for us because we have a very competitive team. Nobody just gets handed their playing time. We're in New Jersey. It's going to be snowy. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be whatever it is. And their, core to them has to be the willingness to fight to improve regardless of where they are. So culturally at its like most basic level, that is probably the best test. And, when we talk to a player, if the agent is sending me messages worried about their playing time and seeing we're signing other players and how does this affect my player and that kind of stuff, it's usually like not really going to be good. And because at some point they're not going to play. And that happens to everyone, but if that is like their worst nightmare in the world, then we have a problem. If their worst nightmare in the world is not getting better this year, then we could work with that. And so for us, that is the key element of our culture that I think we screen by. I would love to evolve to the point where when we have really clear values and behaviors that we want, where we actually do more of a psychological assessment and maybe give someone like a personality test or something within the rule. There's some, we got to be careful of the rules with that stuff, but some type of assessment where we can actually gauge, how are they going to respond to our coaching in our environment? So there's room for us to evolve this for sure, but we are pretty sensitive to, it has to be a two-way fit. We can look at any player and say, we want you, but how are they actually going to do and like it? Will they feel proud to be here? Or are they going to be like, I'd kind of rather be in San Diego or something easier?
I think about the NFL. Of course, it's legendary for in the draft process, the things they put people through. And I suspect, I haven't seen the research on this, but I just suspect that some of them do it really well and some don't. Because they sometimes bring in players that doesn't seem like a good fit at all, but they at least are trying to be pretty purposeful in pre-draft. They do the combine and all other stuff, and beyond the physical stuff, it seems like there's been a significant expansion in the psychological testing and the emotional testing and getting to understand who is this person at their core, and we want to bring this player in if they're not going to be the kind of people we want in our culture.
Yeah. And the amount of investment going into those choices is so incredible. Our ownership group now is part owners of the Giants, or owns half of the Giants. So I have gotten a little bit of a taste of like the type of things they're considering. And it's really smart and it's really aspirational for us to try to get to the point where we have all those considerations as well. Because it's true. It's like, what type of family support does someone have? What's going to happen when they have a bad day at Gotham at training? Who are they going home and talking to? And what impact is that going to have on how they show up the next day? Those things are make or break in somebody's career. Yet most times we just go in blind. We don't know. We don't know what happens from the time they're at the field till we see them again. We don't really know. So I think the more you know about that, the more you can predict somebody's, longevity as a pro, somebody's ceiling as a pro. It's really hard to tell those things just based on scouting or data.
In going back to the Eagles for a moment, that Coach Sirianni talks a lot about what they think a player's ceiling might be and which players are most likely to get to their ceiling. And they talk a lot about, this person, this guy, because of his attitude, his work ethic, his desire to be great, maybe his ceiling might not be as high as somebody else, but he's more likely to get to his ceiling because of all those psychological attributes that person brings to the table. And they're looking for players that are more likely to get to their ceiling because of those attributes.
Yeah. And then you have a happier player too, if they know they're maximizing their potential versus they could be more talented, but falling short and always feeling disappointed. And that feeling manifests in the culture. Like that's really, I think, people's feelings about what they do every day, even if they don't talk about it, when you show up and you're down and you're depressed, or you show up and you're overjoyed to be living your dream, like those things really make a difference. So they can be subtle, but they can be really impactful too.
Yeah. So as you think back to when you were a player and if you had an agent, and your agent were looking at teams for you to go to as a player, were you as aware of those cultural things then, or were you clueless about those things, or what do you know now about that?
I knew nothing about that. I wasn't thinking about that. I also would say that the majority of pro clubs I played for didn't have any culture, or everyone were so new, or the culture wasn't good, but you were picking between it was a little bad or a lot bad. Like it was the type of emphasis on this, these were not professionalized organizations in terms of what we're trying to do at Gotham. There was like 5, 6 staff members maybe, and a group of players, and that would change all the time, and nobody was talking about this. So I probably could have really benefited from a lot more of a look in terms of how the head coach was, acting and what type of leader they were and all those things. But it was just not even a consideration at all.
Wow. And so you're bringing a level of professionalism to Gotham that has not been seen in the Women's Professional League before. Are other teams stepping up that degree of professionalism as well, or is that sort of unique to Gotham?
It's not unique to us. I don't want to pretend by any means that we're leading the way in this. We are all in some ways reacting to a really rapidly changing landscape and professionalism of the game. And there are clubs like the women's clubs worldwide who are leading the way are all tied to historic men's clubs. So like the FC Barcelona women, the Chelsea, Arsenal women, they are linked to a long-standing culture that is, it is not their women's team culture. It is the club culture. And here's how it is. And it's through their academy, their women's program, their men's. The project we have is unique here in the US because we have a number of clubs who are not linked to men's clubs and some who are, but we are all embarking on this kind of new world of professionalization and rapid growth in terms of what this looks like and what the vision is for it. And so we're in a unique place in navigating it here at Gotham based on our history and where we're going, but everywhere is kind of on the same path. And some are a little ahead in one area and behind in others. So for us, it's also, how do we find competitive differentiation in the market as we do this? This is really important for us to be a top winning club and make the brand we want, the on-field results we want. This is crucial, but we're not alone in leading the way and professionalizing what we're doing. That's kind of the current landscape, and everyone is being pushed to do that by the game itself is dictating that. The CBA is dictating that. Other things are dictating that outside of us just being proactive and wanting to.
And I'm assuming that the league is growing from a attendance and advertising standpoint and business standpoint as well.
Yeah, I think all of it is, what ceilings are being shattered, like what we thought was possible and how we saw things and what we thought of, women's soccer facilities and all this looks like in so many ways. Like the bar is totally raised beyond what I ever imagined, at least as a player.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really, the business of it is growing significantly, which also means it matters more. What we're doing, more people are watching it. There's more emphasis on winning, and that sells tickets and all these things. So it all really is this kind of interesting swell, and it feeds off of, it all feeds off of each other.
And you certainly have a unique, I would think somewhat unique perspective on having played and been on teams at so many different ways. Are other general managers among the other teams, are they typically former players, or is that pretty unusual?
So it was very unusual when I started this. And now there are a number of other former players. I actually don't know the current stats. Maybe there was, at some point, I think there were 6 of 14 teams were former players. But we all also come from other backgrounds. Like there's a former player who has a military and legal background also. And then there's, there are former players who have done other things in between this and being a GM. And so I think that is no longer a differentiator, but our ability to use all of our experiences alongside that, I think really can be a differentiator. So that's no longer unique, but it definitely provides both a benefit, but also I would say in some ways my vision of this is only as grand as what I experienced, which, as I kind of alluded to, wasn't great. So I think it also in some ways is a bit of a, we have to intentionally expand our horizons and think beyond what we experience as players ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love your description of the three things that you said you're trying to build in the culture of Gotham, being a winning culture, being a sustainable culture, and making sure that we're having fun at that. And it certainly sounds like a sort of a good three-pronged pyramid, for lack of a better word, for building the foundation of that culture. So my last question for you is, I'm always curious about, for anybody, whether it's me, you, or anybody else, over the years, you've gained a lot of insight and wisdom that you talked about things that you didn't realize then you see in such a different way today. And I'm always curious, like if you were talking to the 16-year-old Yael, that player that she was and the person that she was, and here you are as a wiser, older, granted, lots more to grow and lots more to learn, goes without saying, but you learned an awful lot, and you have just a whole different perspective than you would have had at that time. What advice would you give, or what wisdom would you share with that 16-year-old Yael from what you see today?
Yeah, I don't know if I would have listened to my advice as a 16-year-old, but yeah, I think there's two things I would have done differently if I'm looking back. One is I would have found a mental performance coach or a sports psychologist to guide me in terms of managing the type of stress I was under. Now that's really it's very talked about. It's very normal. Like I had a lot of performance anxiety. I had a lot of stress surrounding my expectations and the ever existing gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. And I really could have used professional help on that and consistent help. Like I needed, as diligent as I was about my training, I wish I was as diligent about the mental side of the game. And I knew it was important, but I didn't really internalize how important that was.
Interesting.
I think the other thing is I would have benefited from being in more supportive cultures. Like I realize now about myself that I thrive when people believe in me. I want to prove people right about myself. I don't do well proving people wrong. Like it just does not motivating for me to prove someone wrong who doesn't believe in me. And I was in a lot of environments where I was proving the coach wrong, or I was trying to overcome some odds. It's not me. It's just not how I thrive. It's not how I do well. But if someone believes in me, I will go to the ends of the earth. I will do everything. I will continue to raise their expectations of me and meet them. And I did not play for enough coaches or enough environments where that was how I was looked at. So I think I had this understanding that to get better, you needed to go outside your comfort zone and be pushed. I think at a certain point, that was no longer what I needed. And I waited far too long to kind of course correct on that. So I guess, I don't know if that's really advice, but I guess those two things, I wish I needed a softer approach at some point and a more forgiving environment and more forgiving support for myself, that I would have gone back and told myself to try to, I think my advice would be like, you'll actually be better if you ease up a little on those type of beliefs.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have listened, but I would try.
It's fascinating. And you know, I think back to our comments about some people will be a better fit in some cultures than others. And undoubtedly, I'm sure there are some players that thrive on having a chip on their shoulder and proving somebody else wrong. Doesn't mean everybody else, works in that. And just coming to understand what works for you is a really important distinction.
Yeah. And it's true for me as a young executive, like I need the same thing. I don't really want a boss who's like, you don't have any of this experience, prove me wrong. Like that's not motivating to me.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, this has been a great conversation, Yael. Always enjoy our conversations, and exciting to hear the way you're embracing the importance of culture and what you're doing to try to figure out. And granted, it's a learning curve and stuff that you'll continue to learn, but seeing how you understand just how important that is and the things you're doing to try to architect that is really fascinating. And I look forward to continuing to compare notes on what I've learned and what you're learning, and see how we can help each other out. So thank you so much for joining us on Culture Architects.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, we'll talk about this anytime. So thanks for having me on.
You bet. And that's it for today's episode of Culture Architects with Yael Averbuch, former professional athlete, owner of the soccer training app Techna Football, and general manager for New Jersey, New York Gotham FC. Folks, if you've been enjoying what we do on this show, make sure you subscribe, and that way you'll automatically get updates on my newest episodes and guests. And if you have a minute, I'd love it if you'd leave us a review, and that way more culture fans like you can discover the show. And if you'd want to learn more about building a high-perform culture in your organization or team, just check us out at CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.